With this feeling I can leave. I'm working and I'm new. Will you dare to give it over and walk by my side? Do you see the road? Do you hear its call? Do you want a part of it? Just getting me above now. Just getting me above now. See the sun goes down, driving lights in hearts, counting trees around. This is our day to dream. My heart it's cursed with you. My heart is cursed with you.
A significant conflict with far-reaching international political consequences has been raging nonstop for a long time inside of Myanmar, and the outcome of the major ramifications for China and the world at large. But it's not as simple as you might think, and China has a lot more to lose in Myanmar than you might realize. The initial launching of the military coup inside of Myanmar was accidentally caught live on camera by this fitness instructor in the capital. Those armored trucks behind us right now are the junta on their way to parliament to try to arrest Myanmar's democratically elected leaders from the NLD party in a coup d'etat. There has been some speculation that China might have actually originally supported the coup inside of Myanmar when it originally happened, but there's just as much evidence to suggest China does not benefit from instability in their neighboring country with all these deals on the table. After some deliberation internally, China is now openly supporting the Myanmar military coup, with their foreign minister announcing that they will entirely support the regime, no matter how the situation changes. That the PRC supports authoritarian governments isn't really surprising. Unlike most of the Western countries in the world, China actually has huge amounts of economic and strategic interests inside of Myanmar that the war and instability has placed at stake, because Myanmar is their strategic corridor into the Indian Ocean. China is landlocked on the western side of their country, making these nations located here incredibly important for importing oil through. China has $230 billion of infrastructure, belt and road projects invested and in the works in Myanmar. China is Myanmar's largest trading partner, and it's important to them because Xi Jinping wants access to that Indian Ocean that the country has. You see, there is oil and gas pipelines that link the Bay of Bengal with China that are important to their economic and strategic growth. Right now, 80% of China's total oil imports go through the Strait of Malacca. This has Xi Jinping incredibly worried because a US naval blockade there could essentially strangle his entire country. And Myanmar finds themselves in a position where they're the key to decreasing this vulnerability. There are two specific things China wants most out of Myanmar here: 17 different vital rare earth metals and deep water port access near the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca connects the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean. 30% of global maritime trade passes through this narrow stretch, and it's the shortest sea route for China to have access to Africa, a major focus of foreign development and oil. China wants access to Myanmar's ports due to their proximity to this strait. as it gives them an easier way of moving Chinese goods to parts of the country that aren't anywhere near their own domestic ports, as well as a secondary stop for their African-bound shipments. Militarily, with close access to the strait, it allows naval forces access to the entire Indian and Atlantic Ocean. And with growing tensions between India and China, it's a strategically vital coastline for both nations to project power. Arguably more important,
we are here live. We're here live. And yes, it is true. What is going on there in China with the Myanmar conflict is disturbing. I was sitting in my cafe next to a school, been teaching my students, and then I saw this little Nikkei news article pop up, and airstrikes on Myanmar. So I was like, wow. I mean, it's not the first time that they've done it, is it? If you consider George Orwell was in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, at the time that he wrote 1984, then it seems to make a lot of sense, to be honest. And I was wondering, how was this tied to China? I was wondering, because George Orwell wrote 1984 in 1948. Well, actually, he wrote it in 1947, and it was published in 1948. And he was literally talking about the British government. He was talking about the colonial era, about the boot step on your face and Big Brother and all that. And we know for a fact, absolutely know for a fact that the bankers actually installed communism and socialism to grab resources. So we already have a fairly good understanding of all of that stuff. It's not that complicated stuff. However, we need to get into a bit deeper into this. And my name is Jason Bainbridge. I'm your host on State of the Nation. I'm still a one-man band, and I'm still mulling around all of this stuff. But let's get into this. Let's get into this. And I apologize if some clips get cut short a little bit, but I don't have a vision switcher, and I would love to have a vision switcher if someone wants to work with me, by the way. That would speed things up really, really, really a lot. But let's find out. Now, this particular next piece is from the Carnegie Endowment. The Carnegie, Carnegie. There was a book. There was a book. There was a book about being rich and how the rich got richer, and how you can get rich. And the Carnegie Endowment, the Carnegie Foundation, is a part of the Rockefellers and a part of the Rothschilds and all that kind of stuff. So they're very much an institutional group, but of course they have to work with the Asian societies as well. So we're going to get straight into it without messing around. We're going to get into it, and then I'm going to try and flick over without delaying anybody.
Idea of local engagement in principle, with the military regime back in full control, Chinese actors may not have much incentive to maintain a strong commitment with local community engagement, particularly because of Myanmar's ongoing political uncertainty. The non-interference of Beijing's foreign policy restored long-standing anti-Chinese sentiment that has already posed great threats to Chinese investments. Therefore, there's much less the Chinese business actors can do at this background. Instead, they're counting on Beijing's influences on the generals to secure and protect their business interests. But for Beijing, learning the lessons of Myanmar's democratic opening, it was thought to be quietly pressing the generals to release Aung San Suu Kyi, the democracy activist, and ask the rival National Unity Government to restrain their supporters from attacking Chinese investments. It would be wise for Beijing to hedge its bets on both sides.
So there you have it. Yeah, we know China's been involved in this for a long time. We can go back as far as the early days when Russia went communist, and it was Stalinism and Leninism, and then China went communist, and that was more Maoism, more of a Chinese-centric base. But of course, the CIA had a lot to do with China at that time, and there are a lot of videos. I'll show you a PDF one day, which I made probably 10 years ago, because I was wondering how long would these pictures last on the internet, because I was slowly starting to realize that there was being censorship on the internet and things were starting to disappear off the internet. So what we need to understand is, let's get into a little bit about what is really happening in Myanmar. And we have to start with George Orwell. We have to start with George Orwell. Myanmar, or previously known as Burma, had been under colonialization at the same time that the India Trading Company was existing. So the world has been overtaken by a particular race of people. And I'm not like, oh, you're so racist, Colin. No. I'm not being like that. This is just historical fact that over the past 200 years, 200 to 300 years, a specific race has taken over, and that would be the English race. And that's why our language is English. Now, you got to look back at history. You got to look back at it, and you got to say, you know, today is English. A couple of years ago, it was Greek and Latin and all that kind of stuff. So this is just a part of a process unfolding. And we as humans, we only live very short lives. So we don't look at it in a much broader context, and that's what we really need to do. We just look at a lot of this stuff in really broad context, that this is a part of power play, power shifting, and it's empire building. And we're currently experiencing the end of one particular empire, which is the colonial empire. And we're now going through a stage of history, which is an Asian empire building, and that sort of Indo-European empire building. So things are really confused, and that's why you get all these wacko jackos running around, you know, with transgender issues and all that kind of stuff, agents of change, trying to stop it, right? Because we're at the end of an empire. We're at the same precipice that the Greeks were at. We're at the same precipice that the Romans were at. We're at the same precipice that the Egyptians were at. We're at the end. And now it's time for something new. But the problem is, where do we go from here? What do we do from here? And this is really unknown, and it's probably going to take another 100 years to figure out exactly the right direction that we're going to go in. So we're going to find out some more about these people in Myanmar. And we're gonna flick over there and get this rolling.
ကျွန်တော်ပြောသလိုကျွန်တော်တို့လူမျိုးတွေကျွန်တော်လူငယ်တွေအဲ့လိုမျိုးထဲမှာရှိနေတဲ့လူတွေပညာပြန်ဝင်လာတယ်တော်လိုင်းလုပ်ငန်းတွေလာပြီးတော့ပူပေါင်းလာထမ်းဆောင်တယ်ဒါတွေကကျွန်တော်တို့တကယ်ကိုအမြတ်တွေပြောလို့ရတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ PDF အဖွဲ့တွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ညီပေးတာစစ်တင်တဲ့နေကျွန်တော်ပေးတာရှိပါတယ်ပြီးတော့တချို့လေ့ကျင့်နေတဲ့အချိန်မှာတချို့ဒီလိုနေတဲ့အချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့တို့ကိုစားနေရကားတွေထောက်ပံ့ပေးတယ်တချို့တက်နိုင်တဲ့ပစ္စည်းတွေကျွန်တော်တို့ကိုကြီးထောက်ပံ့ပေးတယ်တို့အဲ့လိုပစ္စည်းတွေတို့ရဲ့ budget တွေရှာလို့ရတယ်ဆိုရင်ဝယ်လို့ရနိုင်မယ့်နေရာကျွန်တော်ကိုကြီးပေးတာမျိုးတွေတော့ရှိပါတယ်ဆိုတော့
You know, it's a part of what they do in order to maintain power, and it's all based on the banking system. And the banking system itself is very ancient. You know, it goes all the way back, and they've currently you've been looking around the world. There's inflation everywhere. They locked down the country. This is a part of the fall. You see, What they were trying to do was collapse the system so they could reinvent the system. But unfortunately, there was so much pushback amongst their traditional enemies, their traditional enemies around the world. And most of them consisted of Asian royal families, African royal families, a lot of people that were rolled over during the whole imperial colonialization takeover. Excuse me. But all of those people are still really angry about this, and they want it back. So when you go back and look at the last 2,000 years of history, you can see the rise and fall, the rise and fall, the rise and fall, the rise and fall. And we are in a stage of that rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. These people will probably rise again real soon. Well, not in our lifetimes, but once they fall, it's going to take a couple hundred years for them to get back into power. But these are families. These are long-term families that are heavily invested in this, and they're bloodline families that want to make sure that they maintain their position of power on the top. So what we're seeing happening, playing out right now in the world, is just another collapse of empire. That's all it is. And the wokeness and all that, the sexual depravity, that's a part of it. When you look at the Romans, the Greeks and all that, the Romans lost it through financial illiteracy. And then you look at the Greeks, they lost it for sexual promiscuity. And all of these elites eventually get to a very cozy position where they've got everybody under control and they just go wacko, right? Because they just sit in their armchairs throwing money at people. And if you've ever seen TV shows like Gladiator and that kind of stuff, the TV show, Gladiator and that kind of stuff starring, I don't know if it's called Gladiator, but starring Lucy Lawless and a British actor, you can see that they sit there, they're in the back, and they've got sex slaves, right? The king and the queen, or whatever, they're not really kings and queens, but the master of the house and the mistress of the house sit there talking to each other, but at the meantime, they've got somebody jerking them off or sucking them off or doing something perverted to them, and they're having a conversation in the meantime. That's where we're at right now. We're at this collapse of empire right now. We're right here. Let's move over to the next step. I apologize if it's not fluid movement because I'm live and I'm only one person and I really need a vision switcher, but we'll carry on to the next step. And I'll get this started before we push into it.
I mean, to be honest, I didn't know much about Kachin or the Kachin people before I started covering what was happening in Myanmar. Most people don't know anything about the Kachin people. They had lived in relative peace for centuries in the northern part of Myanmar. They've been fighting this war for literally decades. No one has really given a flying fig about what on earth is going on inside Kachin state.
It's not been reported, no journalists allowed. The Burmese government does not allow journalists to go up north to the Kachin area. We decided we had to tell the story. The next step was to reach this place.
I don't want to go into too much detail about how we got in because this will expose the people who helped us. But we were helped by a network of people who managed to get us inside the area known as Kachin State.
Kachin? Yeah, we're in Kachin.
We didn't know what to expect. We knew there was fighting going on. We didn't know the lay of the land. How far is the fighting? How close has the Burmese military come to? It is a very difficult place to access, that is for sure. Moving around is quite difficult because the Burmese military has advanced certain places. There are certain places they have gone back.
When Britain gave Myanmar their independence in the 1940s, the Kachin people were promised their independence, they were promised self-determination, promised equality, given all sorts of promises which never ever happened. The Myanmar military is actually bombing these people. They're bombing civilian areas.
This bombing campaign has become quite severe. There's been thousands of people who have been displaced.
Bombing from the air. Villages or near villages, trying to force people to move, and they have moved in their tens of thousands. Terrified people running, being carried across rivers on the backs of elephants just to get to safety, fled in terror. And some of the people that we spoke to had moved or been forced to move multiple times. Many of the families here have fled attacks more than once, jumping from camp to camp to try and find safety. They live right on top of each other, no privacy, very little facilities, very little altogether.
Sorry about that. And the issue here is that you won't see the woke media covering this stuff. They won't do it, right? All they're concerned about is like drag queen story hour and transvestites and all this kind of stuff. And it's all a part of a big illusion, right? Because we're in a decline of a Western civilization. We're literally in this decline. And a lot of people don't want to accept the fact that we are in a decline of Western civilization. They think, oh no, we're being like Gen Z and all that kind of stuff. No, well, and they call us boomers, right? Generation X. Well, unfortunately, we are now experiencing, because enough time has passed over, we're now experiencing what other great civilizations have experienced in the past. Once the elite get so rich and so wealthy and so comfortable, they start going off the track with financial literacy because they can create it, and they go off into a huge tangent, and it comes to sexual deviancy. And we've literally stepped into their shadow now. We are now experiencing something completely historical, which a lot of people are not really interested in. But the point is, we still need to know more about how this took place. We need to know how this happened. We're going full circle. George Orwell was a police state officer. That's what he was. He was a police state officer, and he wrote 1984, and he was talking about what he was experiencing at the time, not the future. We've already been in the future for such a long time. He was talking about the present, right? So from his time, we've got exponentially worse, much worse than what he had experienced. Really, it's actually a tragedy what we have to put up with now. It's terrible. We've lost our audio on that. Let's go back ahead. Sorry about that, folks. I'm a one-man band.
When the Myanmar army abandoned its experiment with a partial democracy and retook power in a coup, Nornor was one of thousands of young people who took to the streets to protest.
ပူတော်မရှိတဲ့လူငယ်ကိုကျွန်တော်လူငယ်9ယောက်ဝင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီစန္ဒပြဖို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီဆီအနာရှင်ကိုဆက်ချင်းစန္ဒဖို့တော့ကိုကျွန်တော်တို့လူစားပြီးတော့စီယုံခဲ့တယ်
But the army crackdown was brutal and bloody. Norman was arrested at a peaceful protest and put in prison for over a month. When he got out, he knew he wanted to take up arms against the regime.
အခုစလာတဲ့အချိန်ကျတော့ကျွန်တော်ကမဖြစ်တော့ဘူးဆိုမှသူတို့ကပြန်ပြီးတော့အရေးယူမှုတွေပြန်လုပ်စီစဉ်ဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုမှကျွန်တော်ကမချင်တော့နောက်တစ်ရက်မနေ့ဆိုရေးပေါ့နော်မချင်တော့ပြန်ကားနဲ့ရုပ်ချက်ပြပေါ့နော်ကားနဲ့ခီးတင်ကားနဲ့ကျွန်တော်လိုက်လာခဲ့တယ်မချင်တော့ပြောင်းရွှေ့လာခဲ့တာပေါ့နော် BDF ကိုစတင်ဖွဲ့စည်းလိုက်ကြောင်းကျွန်တော်ကဇာတိရအချင်းကျွန်တော်ပူတော့ပြလဲဒီ BDF ဖွဲ့စည်းရမယ်ဆိုပြီးမှကျွန်တော်အားလိုက်စာကိုတော့ခဲ့ရလက်စာမှာဒီကဲဟိုအကြီးကြီးနဲ့တိုင်ပင်ဆွေးနွေးစီပြီးလုပ်ခဲ့ပြီးမှကျွန်တော်
Nornor made his way to a training camp set up by ethnic Kachin insurgents, where he found other young men and women who'd come to the jungle from all over Myanmar to learn how to fight.
那个落唔落到手啊？到手啊，落唔落個？偏啲成家真係，心入面，我根本都唔捱落啊，嚟，踢晒落啊！ไปนะมาขามีเด็กก็แล้วคุ้มครั่งกลางลำเด็กเสียงแล้วก็สมรามีไปวาชมันน่ารักเลยนะเราสกุลได้เจ้าแกสกุลได้สมรามีสกุลจะจ่ายคือมุมตาเลย
The recruits had grown up under civilian rule. Military routines came as a shock.
Military routines did come as a shock to them. It kind of reminds me of the Philippines. I was in the Philippines for a while, climbing up mountains, going to mountainous mines, looking for gold to service people that had a demand for gold while I was living in China. And I got really swept up in it. But once I got to the mountains of the Philippines, I understood that even the country of the Philippines, just like Myanmar, has a lot of different groups, that are trying to take power in the area. And if you go to the Philippines, you got Muslims, you got Christians, you've got CIA type factors, you've got they have over 7,000 islands. So you've got wars raging all over the Philippines. And the most recent cooperation with America to focus on Taiwan is just another stage to the next Ukraine, another proxy war between the US and between the US and China. They had a proxy war in Ukraine between the US and Russia, and Russia were pro Christians. They've set off a revival of Orthodox Christianity. And Taiwan has always been traditionally a part of China. In fact, it's been occupied by Chinese states and Spanish and Japanese, and all that kind of stuff. But it's in their territory. You got to look at it from a territorial point of view. You got to look at it from a historical point of view. So we're going to switch over now, and we're going to take a look at this article to finish off what this lady who accidentally, we started off the video with this woman who was accidentally doing her fitness instruction. She's actually part of the Myanmar education system. She works for the government, and that's what every morning she'd been performing there for 11 months. Sorry, she'd been performing there for 11 months. She'd been doing her exercise routine, and the one day that she did it, she actually documented the actual coup the most recent coup. Now, the thing is that we have to understand about this is that the current government is being supported by the Chinese. The Chinese don't have a history of overtaking other nations, but they have a history of looking after their territories. I'm trying to be very sensitive here. When a lot of people believe that the Chinese are the ones who helped the Vietnamese, right? But actually, most of those weapons came from Russia during the Russian communist era. So to me, it's an anomaly. Why such a beautiful place like Asia had been overtaken by socialism, communism, and then when you go around the places like Indonesia, there's also Islam as well. A lot of these things that we've been grown up to believe as democracy, and freedom, most of them are a pipe dream. History has not demonstrated favorably against democracy, and democracy in itself ends up being socialism and communism. I much prefer the American position of being a constitutional republic for personal liberty, and that's what we have to really focus on here. But can we make the world a constitutional republic? Well, we have to deal with all of these powers first. So we're going into here and we're going to look at the story. And I'm going to flip this over. Add to stream. There we are. Right. So the story is called Who is Killing? Who is Khing and why? This is the lady here. You can see. I'll play that little video for you. That guy in the beginning of the story started playing this. Now, what you see rolling in behind her, now, don't forget, she's just doing an aerobics workout. She's been doing this now for already 11 months. And by sheer chance, she happened to capture the actual latest junta military coup of Myanmar, which is a repeating cycle of history. Nothing has changed in Myanmar since Orwell's days. And this is the big problem. So we have to wonder about a couple of things before I sign off. And this is going to be my last shot here. We have to wonder about a couple of things. What the heck has happened to Asia? What the heck has happened to the world? How did communism get started? Why are some of the most beautiful places in the world suddenly overrun? I remember Fiji back in the days. We used to go there as a kid to the Sanoa Hotel. And then what happened? The Indians took over and there was a war and a general and they took over. And if you understand what's been going on in the past few decades, you realize that there's been a dictatorial takeover of the planet. And this has been a major issue for humanity because we are no longer allowed to be free. That's the problem. We're not allowed to be free. Why? Why not? Because a bunch of elite, wealthy people think that they now are so smart, they control the media, that we're so stupid that we just do whatever they say. But they don't understand that there are serious people who are very familiar with history. That's why they go for the intellects first. The historians, the writers. They go for them first. And anybody who speaks against them, they squash. So what you're witnessing is a full circle of 100 years. We're going full circle of 100 years. And people need to really start waking up to this. Because if they don't wake up to this, we'll end up doing this again in 100 years' time. I'm Jason Baybridge. I'm your host, and you're on State of the Nation.
With this feeling I can leave. I'm working